Welcome back to On the Light, a podcast dedicated to illuminating the profound teachings and legacy of Yogacharya B.K.S. Iyengar. I'm your host, Susan Johnson. In this episode, I have a very rich conversation with the grandson of B.K.S. Iyengar, Srineet Sridharan. Srineet talks about how the practice of yoga was always in the family, and how he remembers as a child going to Model Colony to take the children's classes at RIMYI. Srineet also talks about the scope of his own learning of the philosophy of yoga and the importance of culturing the mind. Please enjoy this episode of On the Light. Thank you so much for meeting with me. I wanted to start with just getting some context of where you fall in the family, because you do have a relatively large family. Are you the son of Vanita?
Yes.
Oh, okay.
So
And
Vanita is Guruji's second daughter. So it's
okay.
Geeta, Vanita, then Prashant Mama.
Okay.
She has two sons, Kaushik, my elder brother, then me, Srineet.
Okay. What was your older brother's name?
Kaushik, Kaushik.
Okay, thank you. So my first question is, do you recall how old you were when you decided to take up yoga? Or was that just kind of always a part of?
Yeah, I think it is the latter. It was always a part of the. I never consciously decided. I mean,
Mhm.
because so I've been in. I was born in Pune, born and brought up in Pune. So we were all together. Yoga was part of the whole atmosphere at home. We were never forced to practice or any such thing. So we just used to love. But once in a while, Guruji used to call us, come on, do with me, and so on. Same thing with my aunt Geeta, Uncle Prashant. So we used to sort of run around the place, do the asanas, play a little bit, and so on. So there
Mhm.
was no conscious point. I think from the very childhood, I mean, same thing too, I guess. But I think even as babies, right, as toddlers crawling, when they were practicing, we were around the hall
Uh-huh.
doing mimicking and so on. So there was no conscious point about taking up yoga. Though there were, I mean, there's this children's class, right? Then we started going to the children's class. So basically, we lived in a place called Nigri, which is close to Pune, but not in Pune. So this is me with my parents. And the children's class is on Sundays. On Saturday evening, usually we would have someone come from the model colony house, either Guruji, my aunt Geeta, my aunt Savita, Uncle Prashant, to spend the evening on Saturday with us.
Mhm.
And then when they went back, they used to take us back so that on Sunday, when we could sleep in model colony and
Mhm.
attend the children's class on Sunday morning. And then we used to spend the afternoon, little bit of evening there at the institute and at home, and then come back to Nigdi for sort of the not very purposefully or with any particular goal,
Mhm.
but generally used to practice, try different asanas, depending on what we maybe talked about during the class or in at home or whatever.
Mhm.
And we had that hardbound light on yoga book at home where all the pictures are towards the end, right? And all the text is at the
Okay.
beginning. So there was one old edition. So I just used to go and try each one in sequence, one after another,
Mhm.
and leave off when it's time for school. Next day, continue from where I left off. That sort of thing, and
Oh.
try. Yeah. So, so that's how I think that's my earliest memory of how we started yoga. Because the summer vacation also we used to spend in like with our at my grandfather's place.
Mhm.
We used to sort of go. I mean, at home often there's some topic about yoga. Or Guruji used to come and say, "Okay, did you know what I found today? Did you know what I practiced today?" Or he used to say, "Okay, come put a mat in front of me. You have to do exactly what I do." So all these things we used to do.
Uh-huh.
We used to sleep together on the terrace. So
Oh.
we'll be listening to stories or whatever. So it's sort of very much part of sort of the daily thing, never a conscious thought.
Uh-huh. Would you describe your grandfather as kind of a playful grandfather? Or did he have a very serious side with you?
No, so I don't think. I mean, I was a little scared as a child. Okay,
Mhm.
but he was still very. I think he was playful, and we used to be playful. For example, when we played cricket, he also used to come and say
Mm.
bowl a few balls and uh, take the bat, play with us. He used to sort of pull our leg, tease a little bit. He used to come for walks, and I mean, so it was. I think, I mean, we should say he was playful. At the
Hmm.
same time, I also sort of knew, right? He was very respected in the family. He's the eldest. So, like when if he walks into the room and we are sort of lazily lying around, we used to sit upright out of respect, right? Whenever he entered the room.
Oh,
But
yeah.
it's not really more about seriousness. It's just the high regard and respect for him.
How about with the philosophy? Were those because you have a great knowledge of the philosophy and you're able to impart that also very well. I'm wondering, did you formally study the philosophy, or were those sort of also included in family stories and
Mm.
things like that?
Yeah, no, about that now. Come to the philosophy part of it. So I always used to really like the Sanskrit language, the mantras, the very sound of it. Okay?
Hmm.
Whenever we had a puja or anything, anyone reciting that, I used to be drawn to
Hmm.
that one. Second, my uncle Prashant used to sort of call us and show some very nice kind of mantras, a very nice sound or very good meaning and so on. So I used to be very particularly drawn to that. Sometimes we used to go for walks where he used to explain some. It just, I mean, some topic used to come up, or I would ask some question, and then he would say, "Okay, in this Upanishad, this is what it is said, and this is what it means." So we used to generally have that. So this is sort of during the childhood.
Hmm.
Then in our schooling, I had Sanskrit as a subject, and of course, we didn't have any philosophy as part of that. But there is this thing called Subhashita. So Subhashita is a literally it means something that is well said. But these
Hmm.
are shlokas that, in one way or the other, they impart wisdom. Sometimes they may be witty and have humor. Sometimes they may be serious and deep. But always it's very poetically appealing and also carrying a very effective message. Right? They may be pure compositions or picked up from one of the texts like Mahabharata, Ramayana, etc. It could be from anywhere. So I used to like I had a book which had 100 of them. I had learnt all of them by heart, and then we had bought a volume too. So I was sort of generally interested in all of that,
Hmm.
and I think then later I at home from talking to my uncle Prashant, etc. So for example, I read the Bhagavad Gita a few times, different editions. And I read the Gita Rahasya on the Yoga Sutras. I read it again. It's not, at least I believe it's not very easy to understand without having enough context. So I've
Sure.
read that a few times and different sets of meanings and interpretations. And there used to be these talks in the institute, right? Whether it's a Patanjali Jayanti, Hanuman Jayanti, there used to be these programs where Uncle Prashant would give a talk or Guruji would give a talk. Sometimes
Hmm.
I would have questions and doubts that these things don't fit together. Where is the source? On what basis are you saying this? And so on. So we used to have those discussions. So that
Oh.
interest was always there. Then much later, like after I got married, I started working, etc.
Mhm.
I did a little more serious study of Sanskrit at home, mostly on my own. Again, read these texts once or twice more. I used to take notes, but then I also looked at there are these two things. Mm, See, in the old days, when the pupils learned the shastras from the gurus, okay. So one
Hmm.
of the very basis is the Vyakarana Shastram, which is the uh, the study of the language itself and its grammatical rules.
Hmm.
And when we say the grammar of Sanskrit, it's very different from at least what I have seen of other languages like English, etc.
Yes.
It's highly codified and it's very much like you have rules in say the programming languages or mathematics, etc. So
Sure.
it's that type of thinking that is required to understand the Ashtadhyayi, Panini's Ashtadhyayi. So it is said that when you learn that, And when you begin to learn something that's known as a Nyaya Shastra, and there's a basic text called the Tarka Sangraha. So I also learned, I mean, on my own, so not probably not proficient, etc. But so as you start doing that, there is a certain refinement of thinking in that's part of that, which you realize that that culturing of the mind is really important if you want to learn any other of the darshana like Yoga Darshana, Vedanta, understand any of the ancient commentaries. It is
Oh.
almost essential in my mind that one's mind goes through this kind of culturing. So I did spend time sort of trying to learn that,
Mm-hmm.
and I think that it is actually set. The grammar is by Panini,
Mm-hmm.
uh, and Nyaya Shastra, etc. Is by Maharshi Kanada, and so on. Nyaya Vaisheshika, Gautama and Kanada. So there is a saying that says, Kanada Paniniyam Sarva Shastropakarakam. So the Kanada's area of knowledge, which is Nyaya Shastra, and
Mm-hmm.
Panini, the grammar,
Mm-hmm.
that sort of bestows or enables you to learn all the Shastras. Okay, so that is sort of the foundation that one needs to have. And having gone through this, I can see that it's definitely true that the way these things are understood with the clarity, the correctness, the completeness, etc., it really helps to have
Mm-hmm.
gone through that kind of culturing of the mind. So I think at that point, when I started going through that, there's more seriousness in terms of the philosophy. Also, the at least in my mind,
Mm-hmm.
a lot of the explanations or the way it was understood, the Yoga Sutras and the philosophy, I think it left much to be desired in the sense that at least I feel there was in some cases or in some of the texts, in some of the translations, there is a slight nuanced kind of a misinterpretation. The message is slightly incorrectly taken or conveyed. People are confused and so on because even something like Chittavritti Nirodha, understanding what that means, understanding what is the Chitta. I thought I myself used to feel that, okay, this is not fully clear. But when you actually go through that and read over, in general, I like to go to the very original source, the text, and
Mm-hmm.
then I think that's where the clarity begins to come. And I thought it was very important to impart the clarity as well. And in
Yes.
terms of the texts, I think we generally there was a lot of reference to Yoga Sutras,
Mm-hmm.
probably not as much to Vyasa Bhashya, which is a commentary, and actually the Yoga Sutra and Bhashya traditionally, the Sutra and the Bhashya sort of go hand in hand. It's one, you don't go through one without the other. So
Right.
that's one thing I thought it was important. Secondly, it's not, there was Yoga Sutras and there is the Bhagavad Gita, of course, both great texts, a
Yeah.
little bit of Hatha Yoga Pratipika. But I was looking for, there is actually much more that I thought I must go through, read and learn the source texts. And then so there are, in some sense, internal contradictions, etc., that make you wonder, make you think. But when you go through all of that, the picture that emerges, sort of there are several yoga Upanishads. Okay, that, and of course there are also the Vedantic Upanishads. I think that one must also go through those. And having read through them multiple times, and in the mind you begin to sort of draw links, and then a coherent picture sort of begins to emerge. And when that happens, it happens as you are particularly for yoga, as you are practicing, certain things come to mind, because I think you are in that, when you are in an asana, you are in a sort of a different zone in terms of the mind, the body, prana, etc.
Mm-hmm.
And then that's where I think it sort of begins to blossom, all of this. So that's where I think the usually often people would say, okay, tell me in brief, what is this about? But actually, it is the details, it is the depth that is more, uh, has a greater effect and is much more quote unquote enjoyable or whatever. It'll be more absorbing, and one
Mm-hmm.
should spend the time, go over the same thing when you go over it again and again. But maybe you read Bhagavad Gita, you read a certain Upanishad, right? And you just read the Upanishad, there's a very different understanding, right? You read
Yes.
the Yoga Sutra and the Bhashya, then you read the Gita, there's a very different understanding. It takes time for all of them to, just like certain dishes, it takes time to cook. You have to do it very carefully. It gives the time. It's sort of you need that, I think, for from a philosophical point of view.
Mm-hmm. So for Westerners,
Mhm.
do you have any recommendations of how one could begin? Like where's a necessary starting point if we're wanting to understand these texts?
Yeah. Here, of course, I am speculating because I probably I can't put myself completely in your shoes. Okay, so
Sure. Yeah.
it may be incorrect, etc. But I think the good starting text is the Bhagavad Gita, and
Mm.
um, because it is both simple and profound at the same time. It's like they say about music of Mozart, right? That the children will like it, and there's depth that great musicians also go deep into that. But there is also the first, especially coming from a different culture,
Mm-hmm.
getting. I mean, here the assumption, of course, is one wants to understand yoga
Mm-hmm.
as it was, as it developed, or as it is propagated in this culture, so in the language of yoga, in the thinking of the seers of yoga, right? Let's say
Sure.
genuinely we want to sort of understand how it developed in that atmosphere and what it means, right? So there is a genuine desire to also absorb the ethos of the culture and thinking, right?
Mm-hmm.
Now, if I mean, given that that is the case, the one has to, I think, jump through multiple texts and then come back to the, I mean, the text you're studying. If you're reading the Bhagavad Gita, there is an initial reading, and it also depends a lot on which translation, etc., you are using. So it
Mm-hmm.
is best, I think, initially to get the most simple. There are these little books with just the verse and the meaning. That's a good starting point.
Mm-hmm.
Also, try to either listen to it or say the transliteration so that you get familiarity with the Sanskrit words. Okay, over time, I think it's going to bring a lot of benefit.
Okay.
Then there are certain other texts like Gita Rahasya by Tilak. That's a, I think, a good starting text for. It has some introductory background, and particularly for the earlier chapters of the Gita, I think that's a good text to start with. But also familiarize yourselves with, say, some of the stories, right? From Ramayana, from Mahabharata, etc. That gives the type of culture, the values, etc. That gives an idea of that. But
Okay.
as much as possible to avoid, I mean, at least this is my mind, to get books that give a direct translation and not so much the modern interpretations. Okay,
Sure.
I think, yeah, it helps to stick as close to the source as possible,
Yes.
so that then it is not sullied by anything. Later we can go to all these modern interpretation, different interpretations, etc. But
Yes.
first build the foundation with the original texts. Now
Mhm.
after this, I think now the language and grammar, unfortunately, we won't be able to do that without knowledge of the language. And I don't think reading that in translation is really going to help. So we'll just have to skip that, the uh, Vyakaranam and the Nyaya Shastra,
Mhm.
but then read the Yoga Sutras,
Mhm.
again the original texts. And from our writings, I think Ashtadala Yogamala, that very nicely conveys sort of the type of original, like Guruji is thinking from his own culture and background. I think it
Mhm.
comes very well in the Ashtadala Yogamala.
Okay.
But Yoga Sutras, the Bhashya, and then revisit the Gita. So it's sort of a circular process.
Mhm.
And of course, stay in touch with the institute in Pune. So now only the Uncle Prashant, but earlier Guruji and Aunt
Mhm.
Geeta, and all of us who could sort of help answer questions and steer
Sure.
depending on where you are.
Mhm. Yes, my teachers used to, or they still do, encourage us to stick to some of the earlier translations when guiding us in studying the Yoga Sutras.
Mhm. Mhm. And it's always good to find one of the ancient commentaries as well, if you're studying any text. For
Mm-hmm.
example, for the Hatha Yoga Pratipika, there's a Jyotsna Vyakya. So that's a commentary, right? It's always useful to also go through it. Maybe not in the first reading, but in the second reading,
Mm-hmm.
it just helps to bring more clarity, references to other texts. Now,
Mm-hmm.
of course, now we have done me and Uncle Prashant, we have done the Yoga Sutra session series, right?
Yes, I wanted to talk
Yeah,
about that as well.
okay. So that's another source to sort of
Mm-hmm.
learn the text. Yeah,
I've listened to quite a few of those, and
okay.
they're very helpful in understanding. And I've been to the hall, so I kind of have this image in my mind of the two of you sitting there
Mhm.
conducting these talks for the students. How did all of that come about? It was well before COVID, right?
Yeah, I mean, it was in Guruji's centenary year of birth,
Oh,
2018. And so everyone, I mean, we thought we should do many things to celebrate that year.
uh-huh.
Then we said, okay, maybe we should do something on the Yoga Sutra, but not sort of superficial or surfacial, where we quickly go over one sutra after another, but let's go a little deep, also cover the Vyasa Bhashya.
Mm-hmm.
And at that point, if you remember, my uncle Prashant had not given, I mean, other than talks in the events,
Mm-hmm.
we didn't have too many recordings of him at the time. So I thought this will also give him a chance to, I mean, because it becomes a series, right? So you can go sutra by sutra. And he was, of course, encouraging that, okay, let's do that and to lend his insights. And then we had kept it open. Okay, and he has other references as well from the Marathi saint poets, etc., which he could bring in.
Mm-hmm.
That's how we started. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
we didn't imagine it will be like 5 year plus project when we actually began.
Yeah.
And in fact, yeah, the first notice only talks about the first chapter, the Samadhi Pada.
Mm-hmm.
But then, as we went along, we said, no, no, let's cover the whole text.
Yes.
Yeah, that's how it came about. It was mainly from the as a centenary year, and at least I mean, I had this feeling that, like I said, there is a need for clarity and rigor, and that's why I titled it that way.
Mm-hmm.
I kept when I spoke to people or read some translations, I used to feel that the meaning is not getting conveyed accurately, or I thought there was room for confusion or misunderstanding. So let's take the time to bring in that clarity. So that's what we have attempted in doing that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, those are very helpful. I'll have to put a link when I'm at the social media post that I do to sort of market the various episodes. I'd like to put a link to
Sure.
those, so
Yeah.
the reference for the students, or for the listeners rather. And then you also have the problem statements that come out.
Mm.
Are those all on your own, or does Prashant also guide you in that?
No, so those are actually all on my own. So the
Mhm.
the way that came about is when attending his classes, and there were so many different approaches to an asana, right, that were being talked about, and you would sort of lose track because there's so much of it coming. And then I thought, let's say if I am to practice, I mean, this was well before the Yoga Sutra session, even probably before I had started reading the philosophy or reading at least the Panini grammar and going more seriously into that. I'm also a computer engineer and so on. So
Okay.
I thought to, if I were to practice, and there is so many teachings, right? What does it mean if I say, okay, let me practice today? What should I do, right? Or which asanas? How do I learn? Okay, now what am I exactly doing? So I
Mm-hmm.
thought it'll be good if I have a sort of a guiding channel for my practice every day. And then, I mean, me as in anybody, but then how do I come up with that, right? And there's so many teachings that you hear and remember some, you don't remember some, and the time for practice is limited. Everybody has their own office and work, etc. The what that is, the Prashna Yantra is actually it's a computer program I wrote that auto generates these statements. Okay, there are certain rules that I have coded in. So even I don't know what the next statement is going to be.
Oh, really? Interesting.
Yeah, yeah. So based
And
on
you
the
wrote
rules,
the
it
computer program. You wrote that.
yeah. So it'll auto generate a statement, and then therefore I don't have to think. Let's say, I mean, I as in any general person, one doesn't have to think. Okay, what do I practice? What are my learning? Automatically, there are these things coming to you,
Mm-hmm.
and not necessarily you get. And the way I've done it is you get two statements every week. So you can take one and study it for like at least 3 days, right? And it'll be more specific. Often I used to feel that in the classes, there's so much, and often it's not very specific. It's just simply touched upon, and you go to the other thing. And because there is so much that the like my ankle pressure not impart, let's say, right?
Right.
So then here I made it. I tried to make it specific, like in this asana, do this, or in these category of asanas, look at that. So these are it was meant as a like in a textbook of maths, right? Mathematics. In the end, you have these exercises where you have to solve these problems, and that helps you understand that whatever was taught in the chapter better, right? And you get the good familiarity. Similarly, that's why I called it problem statements. These are exercises at the end of the chapter where then you take one, you sort of try to solve it in the sense that you practice and study that. And then later, initially it was just these statements, and then I added not all of them have that, but there are some further notes and sort of food for thought, right? Guiding points that come. So
Mm-hmm.
it started something as just for me to use. Then, I mean, being a programmer, I just thought, okay, can I send a email automatically? Then I added some of my family members, and then sort of it grew. People also began to reply. There are nice discussions. So I'm
Yes,
actually happy that yeah, that's
it's really nice.
yeah.
So for the listeners, one that came out on April 23rd says study effect of skeletal muscular body on organic body in Prasarda Padottanasana. And then you have some thoughts and hints with some bullet points to guide us. So are you saying that you come up with those some thoughts and hints? Those are things that you come up to add?
Yes. I mean, when I say I come up, yeah, I did come up, but of course, attending all these classes. So these are all learnings from Uncle Prashant and Geeta, Guruji. So I
Sure.
mean, over the lifetime. But yes, I do come up with them. And
Okay.
also, since these statements are all sort of generated automatically by putting together certain parts and following certain rules,
Mhm.
yeah, the applicable thoughts and hints also get picked up automatically. So the next time for the same statement, you may get a different set of thoughts and hints. Okay, and that's a deliberate, just to
Uh-huh.
have that
Yeah.
variety. Yeah.
Thank you for doing that.
Yeah. No, I'm actually happy that it's also helped. It's almost as though there is a different community that's gotten built up and people do discuss amongst each other. Or sometimes I'll reply to some question or some point, or they'll
Mhm.
share their observations. I did this and this is what I experienced. It's very nice to read and see.
Linking that to the 5-day series that you recently taught from Baylor,
Mhm.
just recalling some of your instruction. For example, in the back bend, it was the third session, the third day. You were instructing us to many ways really to work from within. For example, the concept of the triangle of the diaphragm to soften and to expand that area, which was really helpful. And then also you talked about resting the brain in the back of the head.
Mm.
And of course, Prashant teaches like this as well. It doesn't always mean that for us, at least I don't want to offend anybody, but for students like us who are mainly taught with the outer body more, the arms and the legs and which is necessary in the beginning to learn where do these belong and how, what actions to take, etc. But when we start to work with the subtle body, can you just talk a little bit about the importance of that approach in terms of understanding what Prashant calls essential yoga?
I think just before that, this approach, okay, is very much I mean, you feel it when you practice as well. Okay, it's not as though it is a different approach.
Yeah.
And also, if you maybe if you see some of like Guruji talking about his practice, his asanas, you would see that that is the underlying thought. Okay,
Mhm.
and that is the nature of his thought, as both in practice and in teaching. And so this is something and that's probably why he has called it essential yoga, but that is very much in the culture of yoga. Yoga is about the state of the chitta, understanding the role of the prana, etc. And that is available to experience as part of the practice. Even when, let's say, some of the instructions come from an external angle, okay, if it
Mhm.
is coming from, see, one thing about Guruji, Aunt Geeta, Uncle Prashant, etc. There's a, like I said on I think the last day, there's a very high degree of integrity. So if they are teaching something, right, and this they have experienced it themselves, or uh, I mean, it's not sort of um, copying or mimicking something that someone else said, right? It's something that very much from flowing from their experience. Even the things that refer to the external body, it is often an attempt to make something that they have experienced from within easy to understand, and it's often a simplification because anything else requires a lot of background to be built because before it can be said, right? And especially if these are classes where the students are coming from elsewhere for a week and that background hasn't been built, so then the referring to the external is more efficacious because it can simply quickly be done, right? Quickly be understood, and that can. But at the same time, he would know that when that is done from the external side, internally, there are certain effects that are taking place, and therefore that external thing has to be done. So, but if you, I mean, when you are practicing, I think if you observe as to what is happening, a lot of the actions, a lot of the sensitivity and understanding is in fact related to what we are calling the internal body. And I think related to that, every field has a certain language and terminology, right? And the so for anatomy, let's say it is bones and muscles, and so on. And similarly for Ayurveda, there is the three rasas, and but also asti, majja, the bones, muscles, and so on. Yoga has its own separate terminology. It will refer to sattva, rajatama gunas, right? It will refer to the vayus, the pranas, then the disposition of the chitta. If we adopt that terminology as guiding our way of thinking, and then that is how we would see and we would describe our asanas and experiences. So I think that comes from this understanding of the ancient texts and the wording used to describe yoga.
Mhm.
Also reading maybe the Guruji's descriptions of his own practice, right? And trying to sort of the go one layer beneath what is being explained in the class by either Gita or Prashant Mama, etc. So it's not so much as this approach versus that approach. The because that is the terminology, that is the framework of thinking,
Mhm.
that is sort of begins to that becomes the natural way of expressing, right? What is happening, what is to be observed, and what is to be done. And if you notice, that becomes then very organic to the subject of yoga. It doesn't. There is no disharmony. It is very harmonious as to what is being done, the
Mhm.
way it is being expressed, and then you begin to realize that is what you are observing as well. So I think that's what the subject is made of, right? And therefore, that is why it fits in so well. Does that answer the question?
You know, if we're teaching beginner students, at what point do we start to incorporate those types of instructions? For me, it would take years before.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? Like, because I've been practicing what now? Almost 30 years. And I would say, you know, it takes a long time to understand the intricacies of the
Right.
asana.
I think I mean for now again I've not been teaching for very long. I've been learning for very long.
Uh-huh.
That my teaching only began during the COVID times, because I mean in the family they used to say, why don't you teach,
Mhm.
even earlier,
Mhm.
and but I had never started with my firstly college, then my work, etc. So I never took that very seriously. After the corona epidemic, when we started online classes, my uncle said, now you have no excuse, so you can do it online. So you better start. So I hesitate to sort of say too much about, let's say, what should you do when teaching beginners, etc. But I mean, I'll give you my opinion. I think even when we are teaching beginners, if we are, I mean, again, the integrity point comes in, but if we are sufficiently familiar with the core subject, I think we will find a way to show them the window as to how this connects and what is the actual thing in the core subject. They may not fully understand and appreciate the details of it. We should at least know that. I mean, just like at least in India, if you go to say a more traditional teacher of let's say Indian classical music, and there are beginners coming to learn singing,
Mhm.
every once in a while they would spend the time to explain what is the concept of raga, what is the concept of rasa, what I mean, that just gives a depth of understanding. Otherwise, you are just practicing what you are told, right? A similar thing can, I think, can be done here. There's just at least a glimpse every once in a while as to
Mhm.
what is the underlying subject, and this is sort of the outer manifestation of it, but there's a lot inside, and every once in a while open the window, just show what that is, so that they
Yeah.
are drawn to the subject. In fact, even in the Yoga Sutra, it is said in the Vishayavati va pravritti utpanna manasaha sthiti nibandhini. And for that sutra, in the Bhashya, Vyasa says that he gives some areas where if you do dhyana or sanyama, you are you get a glimpse of divya samvit. So it is like the divine aspect of it, or the essential aspect of it, whether it is this smell or the rupa, gandha, etc. Then he says there, he says any student, however sincere, if they are learning about it, unless they experience it for themselves, okay, it is still aparoksha. I mean, sorry, paroksha means something that we have heard about but never directly connected with.
Mhm.
So it is always good to give at least one direct connection that they can feel, and then that creates a stronger appeal for the subject in the minds of the students. So he says that. So I think it is similarly here also. Draw the connection to the core of the subject of yoga wherever possible,
Mhm.
without, of course, leading them astray, right? Keeping the discipline, etc. That's required. But I think that will create, in fact, a greater appeal for the subject, even in the beginners, and they begin to see, okay, there is a long journey that makes it more interesting.
Right. I think that's very true. I think that makes perfect sense. And also, as teachers, we can't always know what the students are able to pick up on. As a student, I should say, in my experience, sometimes I'll hear an instruction maybe 25 times, 50 times, 100 times before I really understand it. And I'm able to feel it the way it's being said. And sometimes it's just a matter of it being said a different way, or do you know what I mean? Like,
Right.
yeah, especially when we're talking about these really subtle aspects. And now that I say that, of course, it's possible my teachers were teaching me that way the whole time, and I just never did until
Mhm.
until later. On the last day of your series,
Mhm.
when we were sitting for the prayers, you gave us a very beautiful metaphor of a garden with all of
Mhm.
the aspects of yoga in that garden. And I'm not able to explain that very well, but I was wondering if you could talk about that again.
Yeah, so I think it might be that I was talking about the. So firstly, I covered the Ashtangas, I think the previous day and that day. And
Mhm.
the previous day I covered until Yama Niyama, Asana Pranayama Pratyahara. And that day, probably Pratyahara Dharana Dhyana Samadhi. And that was a pranayama session. I think one of the, so there is this term called bhavanam. Okay, and in the there is a sutra Vitarka Badhane Pratipaksha Bhavanam.
Mhm.
Also, a lot of these devotional stanzas they will say Bhavayami, Bhavayet, etc. If you look at the descriptions of dhyana in any of the Yoga Upanishads and these texts, etc., that the description of dhyana and then fructifying into bhakti, etc., there is a it's a very detailed kind of a picturesque description of the deity or whatever is the dhyaya vastu, whatever is the dhyana is upon. Because what is happening there is the seer or the rishi, whoever is experiencing the dhyana, all the okay, now there are multiple types of dhyana, multiple aspects. So I'm referring to one of them. So it's not that this is the only way, but there is this in the mind. Okay, a certain we call it image, but image only means the form that is visible to the eye. But let's say the image also includes the sound, the smell, okay, the whole atmosphere. So a
Mhm.
certain image is it comes into the mind of the one who is doing the dhyana. Okay? And it is said that it comes as part of the grace of the divinity. But as part of learning dhyana, it is also to sort of construct that image. Okay, so the as you contemplate on a certain, let's say the subject of yoga or a certain aspect of the subject of yoga, or one of the maybe your favorite deity, etc. As there are several or one of the tattvas, the five, like I talked about the five elements, right? Prithvi, Tej, and I was giving the descriptions of the different characteristics in the ancient texts of each of them. So as you have that in mind, and you construct that whole picture, which includes the smell and sound and everything, and that picture then forms. That is where your mind is wandering. Okay, so your mind, or that is where your mind resides. Okay, so it is as though the chitta is given a certain alambanam. Alambanam means the support, the cognitive imprint is now confined to that. So that is why it is said desha bandha chittasya dharana. So the dharana means a certain confinement to the chitta, so that the cognitive imprints or the thoughts on the chitta doesn't go outside of those confines. But those confines also have to be certain with a high degree of appeal, so that the dharana can last for a long time. And then after the once it is within that confines, automatically, so now all of these things, dharana, dhyana, samadhi, it is more of a fruit of the practice than a method to practice. So the dhyana happens. You can't sort of create it. But it is said that once it is in that confine, a time will come where the next cognitive imprint is identical to the previous. Okay, so it is not changing anymore. That is where dharana becomes dhyana. Jaya ekatanata dhyanam. So there is the same imprint. And then further a time comes where the awareness that this is a knowledge imprint in my mind. Okay? So I am knowing this. So that awareness itself goes away. Swarupa shunya iva arthamatra nirbhasa, which means the
Mhm.
awareness that I know this, let's say I am thinking of this object for dhyana, okay, and now it is steady in my mind. So that awareness itself goes away.
Mhm.
So now it is not in the form of a knowledge of a thing, but it is in the form of the thing itself. That is known as arthamatra nirbhasa. Then that is referred to as samadhi. So this is sort of the sequence.
Mhm.
So for this, the dharana dhyana samadhi sequence, of course, it is very far from us because there are certain prerequisites of the purity of the chitta to attain any of this. But even to approach that, in the mind, you have to have this whole atmosphere and to the what we are doing as part of the session of pranayama, so that it can then fructify into pratyahara and go beyond. And at
Mhm.
that time, I was sort of helping in the student's mind
Mhm.
build this kind of a construct for the bhavanam, where we are in this the cognitive imprint of the mind is this garden of yoga.
Mhm.
So there is this garden of yoga with various types of wonderful, beautiful plants and flowers and fruits and so on. So this may be the five elements with their characteristics. It may be yama, niyama, ahimsa, satya, asteya. So there are so many concepts,
Mhm.
all of them creating Atma Vishuddhi. Okay, so this is the purification of oneself and the
Mhm.
chitta. And it is as though we are there. There are so many concepts with their meanings available to us. Sometimes we are drawn towards one, sometimes we are drawn towards the other. But this is the area that we are exploring, right? And
Yeah.
the moment you start to be in, if your mind is able to construct that conception,
Mhm.
then your whole disposition is completely changed. The sense of self, or what we call the ego, is completely different. You're no longer temporal, you're completely absorbed, right? And it creates a certain condition that is very, very favorable for what is known as the samskaras and the vasanas. So the vasana to arise, the vasana that goes towards yoga. So as per the Yoga Shastra, there are these things in the chitta which are in there. These are like imprints from previous experiences. Okay? And the imprints will manifest when the right conditions are created. So this
Mhm.
helps creating those conditions so that the vasanas that lead us in the path of yoga get a chance to sort of blossom and fructify. And therefore, it is not that you have different thoughts. As per the Yoga Shastra, the very material of the chitta has now changed. Okay. Because it was, the chitta was made up of certain different vasanas and samskaras. We began the class, you were doing your work, okay, I have to go out after this, and whatever your day-to-day things are in your mind. And then the whole material of the chitta has to change. So then it is a completely different chitta that is present at the time, right? And that is much more conducive to yoga. Okay. I was trying to sort of bring that about when I was describing this garden of yoga. And at the
Yes.
same time, I was also trying to bring up the richness of yoga. It is not, I mean, it is both. In a sense, it is very simple and unified, but at the same time, there is a lot of richness in its detail. Right? So I was trying to bring both of those. That's how a garden is.
Yeah.
It's one beautiful thing, but if you go in, there are so many different things to observe and
Right.
sort of appreciate. That was the picture I was trying to construct as part of
That was, yeah, this is a very beautiful metaphor and helpful.
it. Okay.
Thank you for explaining that. Srineet, we are very fortunate to have your teaching coming up and your cousin Abhijata's teaching to carry on the mission, I guess, of your grandfather. And I just thank you. That I think that is from, I'm speaking for many when I say thank you so much for starting to teach, and it's very meaningful. And sometimes when Guruji passed, there was sort of a worry of what's going to happen now. How are the teachings going to continue? Of course, we still had Prashant and Gita, but to have you and Abhijata, I don't know, are there any other cousins that are going to start teaching?
I don't know.
But I thank you. I hope that we can talk again at some point.
Sure, sure. Yes. No, it's been very nice. So thank you also. Very nice talking to you.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you for tuning in to On the Light. Today, we conclude the first season of the podcast. But stay tuned. In a few short weeks, we will be back with many more inspiring interviews on the profound teachings and legacy of Yogacharya B.K.S. Iyengar. Today, I leave you with this passage from Light on Life. Yoga says we must deal with the outer or most manifest first, i.e., legs, arms, spine, eyes, tongue, touch, in order to develop the sensitivity to move inward. This is why asana opens the whole spectrum of yoga's possibilities. There can be no realization of existential divine bliss without the support of the soul's incarnate vehicle, the food and water fed body from bone to brain. If we can become aware of its limitations and compulsions, we can transcend them. We all possess some awareness of ethical behavior, but in order to pursue yama and niyama at deeper levels, we must cultivate the mind. We need contentment, tranquility, dispassion, and unselfishness, qualities that have to be earned. It is asana that teaches us the physiology of these virtues. Until next time, shine bright.